Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday of the Word of Encouragement. And today I'd like to go to a passage that many times is an encouragement to believers when they fall into different trials and circumstances that are difficult. This is the passage that the Apostle Paul uses to explain why the Lord did not take away his thorn in the flesh. God had given him a very unusual opportunity to actually be an apostle, actually see the Lord after the Lord had already ascended, and of course was the writer of a majority of the New Testament in regard to the church and to doctrine that affects us. So he had a great ministry establishing New Testament Christianity all across the Roman Empire. And God knew that he had to keep Paul humble, and Paul realized that he had to stay humble. And so he's honest. He said, I asked the Lord to remove this. The Lord said, no, my grace is sufficient for thee, and my strength is made perfect in weakness. That's in verse 9. And then the Lord enables Paul to say, most gladly, therefore, will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. But what I want to focus on with that in context is verse 10. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then am I strong. That's the total opposite of how we think. None of us naturally see these kinds of major problems as something good. But the Apostle Paul knew that he needed to come to the end of himself on a regular basis, so he would depend upon God for his grace instead of depending upon himself for strength. He was a proud man before he was saved. He was a man that had gone right to the top, and he was going to persecute the Christians, and he was going to make a name for himself. And now, as God was enabling him to do a great work, he realized that he needed to continually be brought down so that he could be brought up spiritually to keep on with the ministry that God had for him. And I'm very concerned that believers are so concerned about losing their rights and losing the wonderful privilege of religious liberty and our economic security and all those things. I'm so afraid we're so concerned about losing that we forget that sometimes God allows that to happen to get us to a place that we really get serious about accessing his grace, putting his work first. You think about how the distractions of our day have kept us from really being the Christians we ought to be. Any believer just about in America that I would talk to would hang their head and say, we're not where we ought to be. And so we don't want unnecessary trials. I'm not saying that we should embrace that just to embrace it. But on the other hand, we do need to not let fear come in. If God allows that to happen, then he's doing something good. And we need to rejoice in that. We need to accept that. Just like he said, I gladly will glory in these things. I will take pleasure, because when I'm weak, then I'm strong for God's sake. And may God give us that kind of heart.